My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 35 years old and own a modest but thriving hardware store in Bozeman, Montana. It's not flashy, but every screw, nail, and plank of wood in that place tells the story of the last 8 years of my life. What you're about to hear is not a tragedy. It's not even a cautionary tale. It's a blueprint of how to survive being invisible in your own family and how to build something better from the ashes of betrayal. A few months ago, my father looked me in the eye and said something so cold, so casually cruel, that it cleaved straight through every illusion I'd ever had about what family meant. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. He growled. That moment didn't break me. It woke me up. But let's not jump to the explosion without showing you the slow leak that led to it. For most of my adult life, I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed dependable, and gave when asked, even when it hurt, I'd earn not just respect, but love. My parents, Greg and Nora, always had a soft spot for my younger brother Ethan, the so-called visionary. He tried startups, crypto, drop shipping, coaching every flavor of overnight success you could dream up. None of it stuck. But they saw him as brilliant. Me, I built a business from scratch, paid back my loan in 4 years, kept the lights on, built trust in the community. But it was never flashy, never real in their eyes. My store was a cute little shop, as my sister Melissa called it, a side hobby, an afterthought. Melissa, of course, had her own curated life as a lifestyle consultant with over 80,000 followers on Instagram. Her apartment was all white walls, filtered sunlight, and passive-aggressive inspiration quotes. She knew just how to weaponize tone and silence. And Ethan, he never had to show up to family dinners, never had to explain where the money went. It was always someone else's fault, always a new plan, a new promise. And each time his schemes collapsed, my parents would pick up the phone well. Not to him, to me. It started small, 1,000 here, 500 there. Rent, equipment, bailout. I paid, and I told myself, it's what you do for family. I wanted to be included, valued. But each favor was forgotten as soon as the money hit their accounts, and the asks kept coming. No apologies, no repayments, just assumptions. Until the Sunday that changed everything. The text came from Mom Family Meeting, Sunday, 3 p.m. Not a request, a directive. And I knew Ethan had screwed up again. The air inside the family home was stifling that day. The furniture hadn't changed in 20 years. Neither had the dynamics. Dad sat in his leather recliner, arms crossed. Mom was perched on the couch, eyes averted. Melissa was in the corner, scrolling through her phone like nothing mattered. Ethan wasn't there. He never had to be. Why show up when everyone else fights your battles for you? Ethan's startup is in trouble, Dad said. Like he was announcing the weather. He needs help. Real help this time. I didn't respond. I waited. 250,000, he added. My stomach turned. That was nearly the entire value of my business. You have your store, Mom said gently, still not meeting my eyes. It's worth more than that. You'd even have some left. I blinked. You're asking me to sell my business? Melissa laughed quietly. Come on, Claire. You could always build another one. Ethan's on the verge of something huge. This is about family. I looked at each of them. Did they even hear themselves? I've helped him before, I said. How many times now I've covered bills, rent, debts, things none of you wanted to deal with. And not once did anyone offer to pay me back. And now you want me to erase my life's work because Ethan is on the verge of something again. Dad's voice hardened. That was different. Smaller things. This is serious. This is about legacy. What about my legacy? I snapped. What about the stability I've built? What about all the hours I spent building something real, while you laughed it off as a hobby? He slammed his palm against the armrest. Enough, Claire. You've never understood. Your shop is just that, a shop. It doesn't compare to Ethan's potential. It's time you stepped up. Properly. His face turned red, veins bulging, and then came the line, the one that reset my entire life. If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse. The silence after that sentence was louder than the shout itself. He said it like it was obvious, like he'd rehearsed it. My chest felt tight. Not like sadness, but like recognition. I'd always known deep down, hadn't I? That I didn't matter, not the way Ethan did, not even the way Melissa did. With her filtered life and sharp tongue, I was useful, and only that. I stood up. No theatrics, no tears, just a breath, a nod. Okay, I said quietly. I drove back home and began to disappear. Not as a victim, not as a runaway, but with precision. I scanned every document, business filings, tax returns, bank statements. I encrypted everything and backed it up to a secure cloud. I closed shared accounts, changed passwords, froze my credit, prepared for war. Then I returned to the house when I knew they were asleep. I walked through the quiet kitchen, still smelling faintly of my mother's lavender cleaner. I placed a single note on the counter. The shop is not yours to sell, and I am not yours to break. Beside it, I left my key. Then I walked out. And in that moment, I stopped being the daughter who was always there, and started becoming something far more dangerous. They expected me to panic, to regret, to call by midnight, but they didn't understand I wasn't running away. I was preparing for the first real stand I'd ever taken in my life. The motel I checked into that night was nothing to write home about. Laminate furniture, scratchy sheets, the faint smell of cleaning chemicals clinging to the walls. But for the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't have to watch my tone, censor my success, or brace for the next favor disguised as family loyalty. The morning after, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Mom cell. Dad home. Melissa office. The voicemails started polite. Claire. We're worried. Where are you? Then pleading. You can't just leave like this. And finally angry. This is childish. Claire, you're tearing the family apart. What they really meant was, we're losing control of the asset we took for granted. I listened to each message without responding, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. By noon, I had a list of to-dos. First, legal protection. I called the only lawyer I knew had the steel for what I suspected was coming, Ms. Teresa Ramirez, recommended by a supplier I'd once helped out of a zoning permit mess. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice was calm, clipped, efficient. You were right to call, she said after I gave her the bare bones. Family doesn't give them legal claim. You incorporated your business. Yes. 2 years ago. Perfect. We'll begin with asset protection. And then, if necessary, prepare for escalation. Escalation, I asked. She didn't pause. People like this don't ask. They take, you just cut them off. Now we find out what they'll try next. We met the next morning in her modest office, a converted craftsman house on the edge of town. Inside, it smelled of lemon oil and printer toner. I handed her a folder with a decade of bank statements, emails, and saved screenshots. She leafed through quietly, lips tightening at the numbers. Jesus, she muttered. This isn't help. This is financial abuse. I blinked. I'd never named it. But she was right. Together, we went through every payment I'd made to Ethan, every cash transfer to my parents, every time I'd picked up a tab with the promise of next time that never came. I showed her emails where Ethan begged for just a bridge loan and texts where Dad said things like, you know we're proud of you. but this is for your brother's future. Don't be selfish." She shook her head. They never even hit it. By day 3, I'd moved into a month-to-month rental downtown Tiny. Quiet, anonymous. It was all I needed, that night. I bought a second phone. The old one I powered down completely and slipped into a drawer. But silence wasn't protection forever. And sure enough, a letter arrived by certified mail the next week, a notice from a lawyer representing my family. Concern for mental instability. It claimed, estranged behavior, a request for temporary custodianship over my business until family matters can be resolved. I nearly laughed. But Teresa did not. "This is worse than I thought," she said. Flipping through the document, "They're not just grasping. They're trying to create a paper trail that makes you look unfit." We crafted a swift and sharp response legal proof of business solvency. Mental wellness certification from a therapist I'd seen sporadically. Copies of incorporation docs. And statements verifying sole ownership. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a warning I am not someone you can steamroll anymore. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just reacting, I was documenting. Every voicemail, every vague threat, every passive-aggressive social media post Melissa uploaded with captions like, "Some people don't understand family values anymore." I screenshotted them all. I wasn't just Claire the daughter anymore. I was Claire the businesswoman, the strategist, the survivor. But that didn't mean I didn't feel. There were nights the silence ached. Nights I stared at my motel ceiling, wondering what had possessed me to stay loyal so long. I remembered every birthday Ethan forgot. Every Christmas, Melissa accidentally omitted me from her group photos. Every time my parents said, "We're so lucky to have such a stable daughter," and meant, "Thanks for cleaning up our messes." And I remembered the way Dad had said it. "If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse." I'd replayed that sentence 1,000 times, not out of masochism, but because it was the single honest thing he'd ever said to me. 3 weeks after I left, Melissa emailed me. Not texted, emailed. That was her version of serious. The subject line, "Let's be adults." The message was 3 paragraphs of faux warmth, ending in a very clear demand. "Let's resolve this before lawyers get involved. Ethan's future is on the line." They still thought I was bluffing. I didn't respond, but Teresa did with a cease and desist. That was the first real hit. I know because a mutual friend told me Melissa had a meltdown during a brunch live stream when a viewer asked, "Is it true your sister disowned the family?" Her forced smile slipped for just a second. I watched the clip later, over microwaved pad thai. It was the first time I allowed myself to smile in weeks. By then, we were preparing the final step confrontation, a formal sit-down, lawyer to lawyer, no ambiguity, no room for gaslighting. "You sure you're ready for this?" Teresa asked, folding her hands across the table. "Yes," I said. "I'm not afraid of them anymore. What do you want from them?" "Claire." "Honestly, I thought for a long time." "Nothing," I said finally. "I just want them to know they don't own me. Not my money, not my loyalty, not my silence." The meeting was set. A neutral location, glass-walled conference room at a legal mediation center downtown. I arrived early, hair pinned back, blazer pressed, my folder of documents organized to surgical precision. Teresa sat beside me, poised and unreadable. They walked in together, Dad, Mom, Melissa, no Ethan, coward, their lawyer, an older man with kind eyes and tired shoes, followed them in. "Claire," Mom said softly, "you look thin." "Let's begin," Teresa interrupted. "They tried everything. Pity, nostalgia, guilt. We just want our family back," Mom whispered at one point, but the tears never reached her eyes. Then Dad dropped the hammer. "You're being manipulated by your lawyer. You're sick. Claire, you need help. This isn't who you are." I met his gaze and replied, clear as crystal, This is exactly who I am. You just never saw her before.
And then I opened the folder.
Inside records of every financial transfer, every manipulated message, every false promise, chronological, signed, and notarized where needed, including the documents proving he used my business as collateral for a second mortgage 5 years ago without ever telling me. His face turned a shade of pale I hadn't seen before. Melissa stared, jaw tight, speechless for once. Mom looked down at her hands, trembling. Their lawyer cleared his throat. This changes the situation significantly. Teresa nodded. We recommend all demands be withdrawn, permanently. The silence was suffocating. I didn't expect an apology. I didn't need one. I needed them to know the game was over. But just when it seemed the tension had peaked, when I thought they might fold and slither away quietly, Dad leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. You think you've won, Claire. You'll regret this. Blood is thicker than water, and no one sides with the woman who burns her own family. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just tilted my head, and for the first time in my life, smiled without fear. Maybe, but ashes make excellent soil. I should have known better than to think they'd go quietly. The mediation room felt like a battlefield I'd won, but barely. When I walked out, it wasn't relief that washed over me, it was anticipation. I knew my family well enough to understand people who feed off control don't just lose it. They try to reclaim it by any means necessary. 3 days later, I got the email. Subject line, urgent legal notice. Business inquiry. At first, I thought it was spam. But the body of the message mentioned Miller Supply by name. It was from a man calling himself an interested party exploring acquisition. I read it twice before noticing the signature at the bottom, Brandon Weiss. Venture Advisor, Equinox Strategies. Equinox was the shell company Ethan had used in his last 2 startups, the same ones I'd paid off debt for. I forwarded it to Teresa immediately. She called back within 5 minutes. It's bait, she said. They're trying to stage a hostile acquisition. You gave them nothing in mediation. So now they'll try to create pressure externally, maybe tank your valuation, or scare off your suppliers. I sat at the edge of my kitchen table, heart tight in my chest. Can they succeed? Only if you let them think you're afraid. It wasn't about buying my business. It was about destroying it, out of spite. A final power play. Ethan must have realized I wouldn't hand over money again, and now he wanted to bleed me in a different way. Slowly, publicly, legally. So I got to work. I met with my suppliers personally, one by one, over coffee or in dusty warehouse corners. I told them the truth, not the drama, just the facts, false acquisition rumors, attempted manipulation, and my complete intention to stay independent. Most of them nodded, some laughed. One woman, who'd been in her own ugly family drama over a distribution license, gave me a long, bone-crushing hug and said, "They picked the wrong woman to play chicken with." I reinforced vendor contracts, updated my insurance policies, and flagged Equinox as a high-risk entity with my logistics network. Within a week, they couldn't even get a catalog quote under that name. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when I checked the local news one morning and saw the headline, "Binsa, Community Hardware Store, under scrutiny for tax irregularities. Sources say business may be sold to tech startup." I stared at the screen, coffee mug frozen mid-air. They were going after my reputation now. The article was vague, unconfirmed sources. No hard evidence, just insinuation. But in a small business town, that kind of whisper spreads like a virus. I got 3 phone calls that morning from customers asking if I was okay or leaving town. It hit me like a slap. This wasn't just business, this was war. Teresa filed a cease and desist against the publication. But she warned me damage to reputation doesn't wait for legal proceedings. We needed to go on offense. So I made a decision I hadn't considered before. I went public. I sat down one evening, brushed my hair, put on a denim shirt stained faintly with oil from the shop, and hit record on my phone. No filters, no edits, just me. Hi, my name is Claire Morgan. I'm the owner of Miller Supply. Some of you have known me since I opened this place 8 years ago. You've seen me behind the counter, fixing locks, helping your kids build science fair models. You know I work hard. You know I'm not a flashy startup. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to be solid. I paused. You may have seen a recent article that suggests my store is under scrutiny. Let me be clear, that's a lie. A targeted, calculated lie meant to discredit me. Then I told the story, not everything, but enough, about a family that wanted me to sell my life's work, to fund someone else's recklessness, about saying no, about what happened next. My business is clean, it's mine, and it's not for sale. I posted it on the shop's Facebook page. I didn't expect much. By midnight, it had 18,000 views. By the weekend, over 100,000. The comments poured in former customers, neighbors, even strangers. You stood your ground. Your store was where I bought my first toolbox. Screw them. Keep fighting. One message stood out from an older man named Hank, who used to run a competing supply store. Your dad tried the same trick on me in '93. You're not the first, kid, but you might be the last to beat him. That one made me cry. But as the tide of public support rose, so did their desperation. I came home late one Thursday to find the front door of my rental slightly ajar. My stomach flipped. I froze. Then slowly, silently, I pushed the door open. The lights were off, nothing broken, but everything felt wrong. I crept through the rooms, heart pounding, until I reached my desk. The top drawer where I kept my external hard drive backups was empty. I stood there, ice cold. I called the police, filed a report, but with no forced entry. They couldn't do much. I changed the locks the next morning and doubled my digital security. Still, the message was clear. They hadn't broken in to steal. They'd broken in to remind me, we're still watching. I didn't flinch. I posted a short follow-up video. To the person who thought they could intimidate me, you failed. I don't scare easy. And I back up everything. Twice. The views doubled again. Meanwhile, Teresa launched a preemptive motion to prevent any sale of my business without my signature. We made it airtight. But then came the final blow, or what they thought would be. A lawsuit, filed by Ethan, alleging emotional damages caused by slander and familial betrayal, and requesting $500,000 in compensatory damages. It was laughable on the surface, but it was designed to bleed me dry in court. Teresa looked at the paperwork. Face stony. This is it. Their last card. They're trying to drag you down. I looked at the suit. Then at her. Let's drag them first. Because what they didn't know was this: I hadn't just been building a business. I'd been building a case. They wanted a war. I gave them one. But it wasn't the kind fought with fists or screaming matches. It was the kind fought in cold daylight, with paper trails and legal filings, with digital footprints and exposed secrets. They thought I'd crumble under a lawsuit. What they didn't count on was that I'd been preparing for this battle for far longer than they had. Not out of spite, but out of survival. The first move was Teresa's. She filed a counterclaim. We didn't just deny Ethan's accusations of slander and emotional distress, we laid out 10 years of financial transfers, coerced gifts, manipulation, and verbal intimidation. We submitted affidavits from witnesses, former family friends, ex-employees of Ethan's failed companies, even 2 of my high school teachers who remembered how invisible I was in my own home. Teresa's voice, cool and sharp, said it best if your client wants to discuss emotional damage. We'll be happy to present Exhibit C through Z, each one highlighting the emotional and financial toll of being the designated scapegoat in a toxic family system.
Then I made my second move: transparency.
I shared my story in a long-form blog post titled, "The Cost of Being the Responsible One." I didn't name names, but I laid it all out: how I built Miller Supply, how I'd bailed out my brother's ventures repeatedly, how my parents refused to acknowledge my work, and how, when I finally said no, they tried to take everything. It went viral. Tens of thousands of shares. Emails from strangers telling me I'd put into words the very pain they'd never been able to voice. One woman wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to say no to my own family's endless demands. Thank you." But with attention came exposure. A journalist from a national business podcast reached out. She wanted to interview me not just about my family drama, but about small business ownership, boundaries, and how toxic entitlement can derail entire lives. I hesitated. Part of me still feared what full exposure might bring, but another part, the part that had walked away from that living room in silence, knew this was bigger than just me. I said yes. The interview dropped a week later. It was raw, emotional, real. I didn't cry, but my voice cracked when I spoke about the night I left the house and left that key behind. That was the moment I realized they didn't lose a daughter. They lost a source of income. And I finally lost the illusion of love. The response was overwhelming. Miller Supply's website got more traffic in 3 days than it had in the last 2 years. Local news picked it up, then national. And that's when the third move landed. A whistleblower. An anonymous message arrived in Teresa's inbox. The sender claimed to have worked with Ethan on one of his earlier tech ventures. Attached were documents, internal memos, investor communications, payment logs. They didn't just show incompetence, they showed intent. Ethan had taken investments under false pretenses, misrepresented user numbers, and even fabricated beta testing results. Several of the early investors had walked away quietly, fearing bad PR, especially since some of them were friends of our father. It wasn't just shady, it bordered on criminal. Teresa's eyes lit up. This changes everything. We forwarded the documents to the appropriate regulatory agencies, quietly, professionally. Then we did something bolder. We filed a formal complaint for fraudulent misrepresentation, naming Ethan directly. The lawsuit was real now. In response, his legal team panicked. They tried to discredit me, calling me emotionally unstable, vindictive, financially dependent on my parents. But Teresa had prepared every counter document. We had tax records, ownership certificates, even psychological assessments showing I was mentally sound and fully autonomous. The judge issued an initial ruling. All claims from Ethan's side were suspended pending investigation of his business conduct. The courtroom was silent that day when the decision was read. I sat behind the wooden barrier, hands folded, breathing slowly. I didn't look at my family. I looked straight ahead. But I could feel it, the shift. Their story was unraveling. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. They couldn't guilt me back into silence. And worst of all for them, they couldn't hide. A week later, I got a call from an old family acquaintance. "Claire, I'm sorry. I always thought you were the quiet one. I had no idea what you were carrying." Neither did I, for a long time. But with every revelation, every piece of evidence, the weight on my shoulders lightened. The silence that once made me feel invisible now made room for clarity. One day, I walked into the shop to find a small bouquet on the counter. No name, just a note. "You showed me how to stand up to my own father. Thank you." It hit me harder than anything else. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming truth. Then came the final escalation. Ethan's lawyer tried to push a private settlement, no admission of guilt.
just a promise to withdraw all claims if I dropped the counter lawsuit.
I said no. Because some things deserve to be seen through.
I wasn't out for blood. I was out for closure. The court date loomed. Depositions were scheduled. Witnesses were being lined up. My father hadn't spoken publicly, but I'd heard through mutuals that he was devastated at how I turned the world against the family.
Sarah. She'd gone strangely quiet on social media. I wondered if she finally realized the mask she wore so proudly had slipped. Then, just a week before the court date, Teresa called me with a new tone in her voice, low, even, sharp. "They're going to try to settle again," she said. "Only this time, they're offering a full retraction, a public apology, and a non-disparagement agreement." I laughed bitter. Dry. Now they want silence.
Yes, but they also want your forgiveness in writing, so they can save face. That was the final nail.
They weren't sorry. They were scared. But fear wasn't good enough. Not for me. I stepped into the courtroom that final morning, not as the scapegoat, not as the obedient daughter, not even as the plaintiff, but as someone whole. Someone who had seen the ugliest face of familial betrayal and lived to tell the tale without flinching. My boots echoed against the floor. Slow and deliberate. The press had been barred, but I could feel the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes, every person who had read my story, watched the interviews, shared their pain and response. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The energy in the room felt electric. Ethan sat across the aisle, eyes sunken, hands jittery. My parents looked drained, as if the months of denial and deflection had finally turned inward. Sarah wouldn't look at me. She stared at the floor, lips tight. The proceedings began. Teresa laid out everything clearly. Our timeline of manipulation, the documentation of financial abuse, the whistleblower evidence showing Ethan's deception, the fraudulent financial ties. She didn't speak in anger. She spoke in truth. Their lawyer countered, trying to frame everything as misunderstood family dynamics. But the documents didn't lie. Dates, transactions, contradictions all laid bare. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, listened intently, interjecting only to ask for clarifications. She didn't miss a single detail. Then came my turn. I stood up, hands steady, voice clear. I spent years believing that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, I'd finally earn love. Not performative love, not conditional loyalty, but something real. I handed over money, time, energy, years of my life to prove my worth to people who already decided it didn't matter. The moment my father said, "If you disappeared tomorrow, this house wouldn't collapse," something in me did collapse. But it wasn't weakness, it was illusion. I paused, let the weight of those words settle into the room. They didn't just ask for help, they expected it. They believed they were entitled to it. And when I said no, they didn't ask why. They tried to destroy everything I'd built. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge stopped writing, eyes fixed on me. I'm not here because of a personal feud. I'm here because this kind of emotional theft is real. It doesn't always leave bruises, but it leaves scars. And people like me, we walk around every day with those scars. I'm here because someone needs to say enough. I sat down. My chest felt tight, but not from fear, from release. After deliberation, the judge ruled in my favor. All claims from Ethan's side were dismissed. Our counterclaim was validated. He was ordered to pay restitution for the damages caused. With a recommendation for further financial investigation, it wasn't jail time, but it was a mark legal, public, undeniable. And then came the twist I didn't plan. Outside the courthouse, the media had gathered. Somehow, someone leaked enough of the story to make it newsworthy. I hadn't wanted a circus, but now, I saw it differently. This wasn't about shaming anyone. It was about truth echoing beyond that courtroom.
When the cameras turned to me, I didn't give them vengeance. I gave them closure.
My name is Claire Hastings. I own Miller's Supply. And I survived the kind of family that tells you love is conditional on how much you give. I stopped giving and I started living. That quote would later be picked up by dozens of outlets. But at that moment, it just felt like exhale. Over the next few months, things shifted fast. My store's revenue doubled. I hired 2 more employees, Jade, a recent trade school grad, and Miguel, a father of 2 switching careers. I told them both, this place isn't just hardware, it's healing. The messages didn't stop. People from all over the country, some from other countries, sharing their own scars, their own disappear and the house won't collapse moments. I replied to as many as I could. Some cried, some were angry, some were just grateful to know they weren't crazy. Sarah went silent on social media. Last I heard, she moved cities, changed jobs, whether out of shame or just to start over. I didn't know. Ethan tried to relaunch another startup under a different name. Word got out. No one invested. My parents sold the house eventually. Second mortgage unpaid. Credit wrecked. They didn't reach out. And I didn't chase closure where it wasn't offered freely. But then, one rainy afternoon, months later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short letter handwritten. Neat.
Claire, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I see it now. I hope you're doing okay, Mom.
It didn't undo anything, but I didn't burn it either. I placed it in a drawer, not as a symbol of reconciliation, but as a bookmark. A reminder that even the worst systems can crack, that sometimes guilt finds its way through the cracks, and that I had made peace without needing their permission. I live in a small house now, just me and my dog, Benson, the kind of place with a creaky floor and bad Wi-Fi, but the best morning sun you'll ever see. Every Saturday, I open the shop early, sweep the floor, brew coffee, and greet the regulars contractors, grandmas with tool belts, teenagers fixing up their bikes. None of them know the full story. They just see me smile. But I carry it all with me, not as a burden, as armor. Because I know now family doesn't mean loyalty by blood. It means respect. It means seeing someone fully and choosing not to use that sight against them. And when I see someone standing too still in my shop, quiet, hesitant, shoulders tight, I recognize that silence, that weight. I offer a smile. Sometimes I say, "You're safe here."
Sometimes. That's enough. Story 2, I don't talk about this often, but I think I'm finally ready to write it all down.
My name is Elena Ward. I'm 34 now, living in Portland with a decent job and a quiet apartment. But when I was 12, my entire life collapsed in one afternoon. It started at Grand Central Station. The day my parents left me. Not metaphorically, they literally abandoned me. On purpose. And the worst part, I didn't realize it until it was too late. I grew up in Briar Hill, Vermont. Small town vibe. Everyone knew everyone. My parents, Brian and Judith Ward, were the type of couple people admired from a distance. Church every Sunday, smiled in public, ran the local cafe. But behind closed doors, it was another story entirely. My older brother, Daniel, could do no wrong. He played piano, volunteered at the shelter. Straight A's, my mom's favorite child by a mile. Me, I was the quiet one, the weird one. I asked too many questions, didn't smile on command, and had panic attacks that made them roll their eyes.
They called me dramatic, said I was too much.
But the truth was, I was a kid trying to survive in a house that never felt safe. The buildup was subtle, tension instead of slaps. Conditional love disguised as tough parenting. I wasn't hit, I was frozen out. Every mistake, every imperfection was used against me. Then, in the spring of 6th grade, I got a B+ on a science project. I remember standing there, holding the paper with the teacher's smiley face. Proud for once, I showed it to Dad.
He glanced at it, shrugged. B+, that's lazy.
Mom chimed in with, "Maybe you're just not cut out for science." Honey,
something in me started to shut down that day.
2 weeks later, they told me we were taking a trip to New York City. Just the three of us. They said, "Daniel's got exams." I didn't think much of it. We packed light. They acted excited. We listened to music the whole drive. For a second, I thought maybe this was their way of making things right. We got to Grand Central just after lunch. It was overwhelming, loud, bright, massive. They said they needed to find a rental counter and asked me to sit tight by one of the benches near the food court.
Back in 15, Dad said.
They walked away.
And they didn't come back.
At first, I waited. I wasn't scared yet, just confused. I counted the minutes. After 25, I started pacing, at the 1-hour mark. I walked in a full circle around the lower concourse, looking for them.
I tried calling their names. I went outside to check if the car was still there. It wasn't. At some point, I sat back down and stared at the giant clock. And then I saw it. Our family's SUV driving away.
Dad behind the wheel, Mom in the passenger seat.
I ran toward the doors.
Mom rolled down the window. She didn't look sad. She didn't even avoid my eyes.
She said, "Let's see how independent you really are, Elena."
And then they drove off.
I stood there, frozen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My brain couldn't process it. I kept thinking, this is a joke. They'll circle back. They're trying to teach me a lesson.
But deep down, I knew.
They had decided I was disposable. Eventually, a woman from a security kiosk noticed me wandering. Her name was Marianne. She offered me a bottle of water, called a transit officer, and I ended up at a nearby precinct. They thought maybe I was lost. I told them everything. They didn't believe me at first. Then they tried calling my parents.
No answer. They left a voicemail. No reply. I stayed the night in a juvenile intake facility. The room had no windows. The mattress smelled like bleach. And I cried so hard I had a nosebleed. When Child Protective Services got involved, my parents told them I'd run away, that I had been acting out, that they'd spent hours looking for me, and I'd vanished. It was total fiction, but they never showed up to prove their story. Not once. They signed over temporary custody to cooperate with the investigation, and then ghosted, completely. I was placed in emergency foster care the next day. If you've ever been in the system, you know what comes next, moving from one temporary home to another, each with their own rules, dynamics, and dangers. But nothing was harder than the emotional whiplash of realizing the people who made you simply chose to delete you.
No call, no visit, no goodbye.
The only person who stayed in my life after that was my caseworker, Leslie, a tired woman in her 50s who smoked menthols in the parking lot between placements. She wasn't warm, but she was honest.
"They're not coming back," she said once, bluntly. And I respected her for that.
She helped me get my name legally changed at 17. I dropped Ward and became Elena Walker. Walker felt right, like I had to move forward, or I'd sink. For years, I thought that was the end of it. I went to community college, got my degree, found steady work, learned how to exist. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need closure, that I'd buried that scared, abandoned girl. Until last week. I came home from work and found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Postmarked from Vermont. Inside was a folded piece of paper, handwritten.
"Elena, if you're reading this, I guess I finally found you. I'm Daniel. I'm sorry I didn't know the truth. They told me you ran away, but I know now, and I need to see you. Please call me. D.
And just like that, the box cracked open again. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at that letter, shaking, trying to decide if I was ready to know what really happened. If I even wanted to know. Because if Daniel knew now, that meant something had happened.
Something had changed.
And it meant my parents weren't done hurting people. The first time I heard Daniel's voice in over 20 years, it was over speakerphone. I stood in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other holding my phone like it might catch fire. He picked up on the third ring. Elena. His voice cracked like someone stepping on broken glass. He sounded older, more tired, like life had aged him in a way mine already had.
It's me, I said.
Then silence. Not awkward, just heavy. I didn't think you'd call, he said. I almost didn't. We agreed to meet in person. Neutral ground, a cafe in Albany. Halfway between Portland and his town in New Hampshire. Public enough that I could leave if things got weird. I got there early. Typical. I always show up early when I'm anxious. Keeps me from talking myself out of it. Daniel walked in 10 minutes late, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers like an apology that had taken too long to bloom. I didn't stand up. I just watched him approach. He looked familiar, but foreign, like a painting I used to know, now repainted in colder colors. His hair was thinner, face drawn, eyes unsure. He sat across from me.
I wasn't sure you'd recognize me, he said.
I wasn't sure I wanted to. He flinched, but nodded.
Fair.
For the next hour, we danced around the obvious. He told me about his life married young, divorced by 30, no kids, works in IT now, lives alone, therapy twice a week, apparently. He started digging into the past after a breakdown last Christmas. Everything just hit me, he said. I listened, not out of forgiveness, just curiosity, like watching a storm cloud finally admit its rain. Then came the part I'd been dreading. They told me you'd run away, he said quietly, that you were angry, unstable, that they'd begged you to come back, but you refused. I stared at him. And you believed that? He winced. I was 13. I didn't know what to believe. And he stopped, started again. They made it easy not to ask questions. Any time I brought you up, Dad would just shut down. Mom would cry. They made you sound like the villain in your own disappearance. I said nothing. I didn't question it until years later. He continued, found some old bank statements, saw that they'd taken out life insurance in your name, claimed you were legally deceased at one point. That caught me off guard. What? He nodded slowly. I have the paperwork. Filed when you were 17. I blinked, but I wasn't even in hiding. I was in the system.
Exactly.
We sat in stunned silence for a while. Then he said it. They wanted you gone. For good. The weight of those words shouldn't have surprised me, but hearing them out loud did something to me. Like watching a bruise you thought had healed suddenly turn black again. Daniel reached into his bag and slid a folder across the table. I hired a lawyer, had some old records pulled. You should read them when you're ready. But, he paused, that's not why I asked to meet. Then why? Because I want to know if you're okay, if you ever were. I didn't know how to answer that. So I didn't. Instead, I opened the folder. Inside were copies of letters, emails, statements. One letter from my mother to the family lawyer, dated 6 months after I'd disappeared. It referred to me as a destabilizing influence on Daniel's development. It ended with, "We believe removing her from our home was ultimately in the best interest of the family. No mention of me being found. No mention of police. No effort to locate me. Just gone. Like a bad investment written off on a spreadsheet. Daniel was crying now, quietly, but I could see it.
"I'm sorry," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I had to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry."
I don't think you owe me as much as you think you do, I said. He looked surprised.
"You were a kid, Daniel. I don't blame you for not knowing. I blame them for making sure you didn't."
After coffee, we walked a few blocks. The air was cold, brittle, the kind that makes every inhale feel sharp. Daniel stopped at a corner. "They're not together anymore," he said. "Really?" "Yeah, divorced 10 years ago. Dad lives in Florida, Mom's still in Vermont, but..."
I waited.
"Dad's sick. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4.
I didn't flinch. Didn't feel anything.
"He asked about you," Daniel said. "Said he wanted to talk. Before it's too late." I looked at him.
I already had my goodbye.
Later that week, I sat in my apartment with that folder on my lap, reading line after line of carefully worded betrayal, reports, memos, even a court filing attempting to terminate parental rights preemptively, just in case I ever resurfaced. They had prepared to erase me, and almost succeeded. I started going to therapy again, not because of Daniel, not even because of the letters. Because for the first time in a long time, I realized I had not healed. I had adapted, survived, but I had never allowed myself to process any of it. My therapist, a woman named Carmen, listened without judgment. "You survived abandonment," she said. "That's not small." "Then why do I feel like it still defines me?" "Because you haven't decided what story you want to tell about it yet." I thought a lot about that. What was my story? Was I the girl they left behind? Or the woman who walked forward anyway? Weeks passed. I kept in touch with Daniel. Cautiously. We talked over email mostly, shared memories, laughed a little, cried once or twice. He told me about his own regrets. How he stayed quiet too long. How he let their version of me become the truth because it was easier. I didn't forgive him, but I started to understand him. Then came the letter. Not from Daniel. From Judith Ward, my mother. Delivered by certified mail. Just a single page. "Elena, I heard you spoke to Daniel. I'm glad. I hope you understand we did what we thought was right. You were always difficult, always dramatic. You scared me sometimes. I didn't know how to be your mother. I still don't. I'm not asking for a relationship. I just want you to know that I remember you. Mom." I read it once, then again. Then I lit a match and watched it burn in my kitchen sink. They remembered me, but they never saw me. I booked a solo trip to Vermont, not to see anyone, just to stand in the places that used to hurt. The schoolyard, the cafe, the old house, now repainted and up for sale. It didn't break me. It felt hollow, like the stage of a play that ended years ago. I sat on a park bench across from our old street and whispered to the 12-year-old me. "You weren't too much. You were never too much. They were too little." And that night, I slept like I hadn't in decades. Some things you don't do for closure. You do them so you know, without a doubt, that you tried.
That's the only reason I agreed to see him.
My father. Daniel arranged the visit, quietly. No pressure, just said, "If you change your mind, I'll make sure he's lucid. He doesn't have long." I sat with that for a few days. Lucid, not long. Strange how those phrases lose their punch when you've already been grieving someone for 2 decades. But there was still a question in my chest I couldn't shake. Did he ever feel guilt, even once? So I said yes. We met in a hospice center in Clearwater. A clean, quiet building that smelled like lemon disinfectant and warm soup. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting in the hallway with a paperback open in his lap. "He's awake," he said. "How bad?" Daniel didn't sugarcoat, skin and bones, in pain, sharp sometimes, gone others. He knows you're coming.
I nodded.
The walk to room 14 felt longer than the flight that brought me there. When I stepped inside, I saw the man who used to tower over me reduced to a bundle of sheets and shadow. He turned slowly, blinked, squinted like he was trying to place me.
Elena.
I didn't answer right away. I watched his face, that face I used to scan for signs of approval, that jaw I used to flinch from when it clenched, that mouth that once told me, at 11 years old, "You're not cut out for this family."
Now it barely moved.
But he recognized me.
Elena, he rasped again. You look good.
I sat in the corner, didn't move closer. He didn't reach for me. He just stared like I was a memory that came back to haunt him. The silence stretched. Then, finally, he spoke.
They told me you're doing well.
They? Daniel, he said. And Judith, she called. Said you wrote back. I didn't. He nodded, slow, figured. I watched him breathe, shallow and strained. I want to ask you something, I said. Okay. Did you know what you were doing when you left me? His eyes flickered. A pause. Then a whisper. Yes. That was it. No excuse, no lie, no sugar. Just yes. I was too much, I said quietly. Wasn't I too emotional, too difficult? That's what she always said. He swallowed. Hard. You scared her. And me. I think you saw things too clearly. Asked questions we didn't want to answer. That's your reason. No, he said, that's my confession. He closed his eyes for a long moment. I didn't leave you because you were too much, he said. I left you because we were too little. Cowards. Both of us. Your mother wanted peace. I wanted silence. You were the storm. His voice cracked. And we were afraid of storms. I felt nothing heroic in that moment. No cinematic forgiveness. No tidal wave of rage. Just stillness. Like staring at the ocean and realizing it doesn't care if you drown or float. He looked at me again. Do you hate me? He asked. No, I said honestly. His eyes widened. I spent years hating you. I continued, but it was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. Eventually, I just put it down. He blinked back something wet. I'm not here for you, I said. I'm here for her, the girl you left. She deserved to know she wasn't the broken one. He nodded, like that made sense. Or maybe he just couldn't argue anymore. She was remarkable, he said. We didn't deserve her. He turned his head toward the window. The light caught on the edges of his face, making him look even more fragile. You remind me of my mother, he said softly. Fierce. Hard to impress. I stood. That's the last thing you get to say to me. He didn't fight it, just nodded again. And for the first time, I felt the distance between us finally match the one he created all those years ago. I walked out of the room and didn't look back. Daniel was waiting in the hallway. He didn't ask what we said, just handed me a coffee and said, I hope it helped. It didn't, I said, but it ended something. Back in Portland, I returned to work. I watered my plants. I went to therapy. I walked the long way home just to feel the wind on my face. But something had shifted. Not like a breakthrough, more like a key turning in a lock I hadn't noticed before. One night, I opened my storage closet and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the remnants of that girl they tried to erase. A drawing from 5th grade. A note from a foster mom who once let me sleep with the light on. A torn backpack strap. A necklace with a chipped stone I used to clutch like armor. I held each one gently, like a bone fragment from someone I used to be. In therapy, Carmen asked me what I'd say to that girl now.
I thought for a long time, then finally said, "You did nothing wrong. They couldn't love you because they didn't know how. But that's not your burden to carry. You survived. And you grew into someone I'm proud to be." Carmen smiled. "Sounds like forgiveness." "No," I said. "Sounds like self-respect."
Daniel and I keep in touch now. Not close, but steady. We don't try to fix each other. We just stay real.
He came to Portland once. We walked along the river. He asked me if I'd ever want to visit Mom.
I told him no. Some doors stay closed because opening them doesn't lead to anything new, just more of the same dust.
Last week, I received another letter. No name, just a return address from Florida.
I didn't open it.
I dropped it in the fireplace and watched it curl into ash. Some stories are done being read. What I've learned is this:
being abandoned is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of someone else's failure to see it. You can be shattered and still rebuild. You can be unwanted and still become the kindest, strongest version of yourself.
I wasn't too much. I wasn't broken. I was just inconvenient to people who didn't want to grow.
That's not on me.
I don't forgive them.
But I've stopped needing them to understand. Because I finally do. And that's more than enough. Story 3. The sun was already dropping low by the time I arrived in Ash Hollow. It painted the town gold, like it was trying to make something beautiful out of dust and wood. Shadows stretched across the street, long and sharp. And a hawk circled quietly overhead as the stagecoach rolled in, creaking and heavy from miles of bad roads. No one rushed to meet it. I waited for someone to call my name, to wave or smile or even nod, but the only greeting I got was the faint stink of livestock and a breeze that kicked up a cloud of dry earth. I stepped down from the coach carefully, smoothing my skirt out of habit. It was my best dress navy calico, stitched neat, with a collar I'd embroidered by candlelight back in Tennessee. But the moment my boots hit the dirt, I knew it didn't matter. No one was looking for me. A few people glanced from porches or behind open doors. Most just went back to whatever they were doing. The only one who seemed interested was a tall man leaning against a post outside the general store. He had a mustache trimmed a little too carefully, and a way of standing like he owned whatever land his boots touched. That was Barton Lane. We'd exchanged 3 letters before he sent me money for a coach ticket. In those letters, he told me he was looking for a partner, someone who could cook, sew, and hold a home steady. I told him I could do all that and more. I never claimed to be beautiful. I never claimed to be small. But apparently, he thought I should have been. He walked toward me with a tight mouth and a glance that said more than his words ever could. "This is a mistake," he said. Loud, clear, no attempt at kindness. "You didn't say anything about proportions." I just stared at him. I gave my weight. "You gave a number," he snapped. "Not a picture, not the truth. What would people say if I brought you home?" He didn't wait for a response. Behind me, someone, probably the saloon owner, laughed. I could feel my face burning. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I could have argued. I could have begged. But he wasn't interested in explanations. He wanted a wife that fit in a box. I didn't fit. The town preacher stepped forward awkwardly. "Mr. Lane, you sent for her. She's here. That makes this your responsibility." Barton didn't even blink. "Then you marry her." The laughter came again, louder this time. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked back toward the coach barn with my satchel in hand. No one stopped me. I found a corner in the loft and sat with my back against the wall. I didn't open my suitcase, didn't eat, didn't even cry. I just sat there, trying to figure out where I belonged in a place that didn't want me. By the time the sun set, the barn was full of shadows. The horses shifted in their stalls, snorting softly, and the wind pushed against the boards like it was trying to get in. I pulled my cloak tighter around my shoulders and closed my eyes. No one knocked. No one came looking. Not that night. In the morning, I woke up stiff and cold. The barn smelled like hay and old wood, and the ache in my back reminded me I hadn't slept in a real bed in days. I stepped outside just as the town started to stir. That's when I saw him. He was standing near a cart, tall and still, with a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. He didn't look at me the way Barton had. He didn't flinch or frown. He just watched, calm, steady, not unkind. I turned away, embarrassed by how hollow I felt, and headed toward the well. The pump handle was stiff with rust, and my hand slipped trying to get it going. I scraped my knuckles, cursed under my breath, and tried again. The water finally groaned out in slow drips, not enough to do more than rinse the sleep from my eyes. Then he stepped forward. The man from the cart. He didn't speak, just took the handle, worked it with quiet strength, and handed me the bucket when it was full. Our fingers didn't touch. I nodded. So did he. Then he turned and walked away like it was nothing at all. Later that day, the saloon keeper Tilda, I think, caught me near the general store. "You can keep trying," she said, lighting a cigarette, "but this town don't change its mind easy." I didn't argue, just kept walking. That night, back in the barn, something was waiting for me. A wool cloak, folded neatly over my suitcase, and next to it, still warm, a biscuit wrapped in paper. No note, no name. But I knew who left it. I sat in the straw, pulled the cloak around my shoulders, and ate the biscuit slowly, like it was the first kindness I'd tasted in months. I didn't cry, but I let myself breathe, because someone had seen me, and maybe that was enough for now. The next morning, frost covered the barn like a warning. I woke up aching, my back stiff from the floor, my fingers stiff from the cold. The biscuit from the night before sat warm in my memory, but my stomach had moved on from it. I stretched my arms, slipped on the cloak, still smelled faintly of wood smoke, and something else, clean and quiet, and walked out into the gray morning. Ash Hollow was already stirring. The bell over the church door clanged twice, slow and lazy. A cart creaked past with feed sacks piled high. Boots thumped down the boardwalk. No one looked at me for long. No one said hello. That was fine. I made my way back to the pump. The handle still stuck, still rusted, but today, I was ready. I wrapped my skirt around my palm and pulled harder. It groaned. Water spat out, then slowed. It would take time. That was okay, too. He was there again, the man from the cart. I didn't notice him until I looked up. Same wide-brimmed hat, same quiet, steady way of watching. He didn't approach, just nodded once and went back to tying something down in the back of his wagon. But he was looking when I turned. He saw me. That was more than most gave. I went back to the barn with a small basin of water and a sliver of soap I'd kept wrapped in a cloth since Missouri. I cleaned my face, changed into the second dress in my suitcase, the one with the mended hem, and walked to the church hall. I'd heard from one of the preacher's sisters that they paid for sewing, even if it wasn't much. The older woman who answered the door was tall, bony, and didn't smile. "You know your stitches." "Yes, ma'am." She gave me a torn pillowcase and a thimble. 2 hours, 1 coin. I nodded. She didn't offer me a chair, so I worked standing at a narrow table by the window. My hands moved steady, automatic, needle through cotton, pull, tighten, repeat. It was simple, which is what I needed. By noon, I'd earned enough for a roll and a boiled egg. I ate them behind the church, sitting on the stoop where no one passed. The bread was dry, the egg overcooked, but it was more than yesterday. A few minutes later, a boy appeared. Couldn't have been more than 7 or 8.
Boots too big. Scarf tied like someone who'd watched it done but never had it explained.
He had a stick in one hand and a bundled cloth in the other.
"You're new," he said, not like a question. "I am. You sleep in the barn." "I do."
He thought about that. "It's cold."
"I manage."
He nodded, like he approved of the answer. Then unwrapped his cloth and handed me a sliver of dried apple. I didn't ask where it came from, just took it carefully and said, "Thank you."
"I'm Micah."
"Delilah." He didn't say it was a strange name, didn't ask what I was doing here, just sat down beside me, legs swinging, chewing his own piece of apple. We stayed like that for a few minutes, silent, but not awkward. Then his uncle came around the side of the church. I knew it was him before Micah said anything, the quiet one from the wagon. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod toward the boy. Micah stood and brushed crumbs from his pants. "This is my uncle, Silas," he said. I looked up at the man. He's kind. Micah grinned. He don't talk much, but he sees everything. Silas tipped his hat just barely and walked on with the boy trailing behind. No fuss, no awkwardness, just steady as ever. I watched them go. Those words, "he sees everything," stayed with me. That night, back in the barn, there was another biscuit. Not warm this time, but wrapped clean. The cloak was folded differently, neater. A patch had been sewn into the rafters above my corner where the wind used to sneak through. It wasn't much, but it kept the cold from biting as deep. Small things, quiet things, but noticed. The next few days passed like that. Work when I could find it, stitching at the church, once even mending a coat for the saloon barkeep. Tilda didn't offer sympathy, but she offered coin. And that counted more. Silas passed through town every few days. I didn't always see him, but Micah came by the barn more than once. He brought a book with no cover and asked if I could read. I said yes. So I did. We sat by the lantern on an old hay bale. He leaned close as I read about dusty trails and old riverboats, about girls who didn't wait for rescue, but found their own way through. He didn't ask many questions. He just listened. When Silas came to fetch him, he paused in the doorway. I stopped reading. He looked at me, then at the boy curled beside me. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You're not?" He nodded. "That boy don't warm up easy." "Neither do I." Our eyes held. Not long, but long enough to feel like something passed between us. He didn't say anything more, just took Micah's hand and walked back into the snow. By the end of the week, I knew I couldn't stay in the barn much longer. The cold was getting worse. My fingers shook when I sewed. My joints ached before noon. I waited near the churchyard, bundled in my cloak, until I saw them ride in from the west, Silas in his wagon, Micah beside him, scarf flapping in the wind. I stepped into their path. "I want to work," I said, before he even stopped the wagon. He raised an eyebrow. "I can sew, cook, clean. I don't expect a bed, just space." He studied me for a long moment, measured, not doubtful. Then Micah leaned toward him and whispered something. Silas didn't smile, just gave the smallest nod. "We leave now." I climbed into the wagon without waiting for permission. The road out of Ash Hollow was white with frost and silence. The ride was long and cold, but I didn't care, because I wasn't going back. His land sat low in a valley, quiet, clean, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. The house was small, but solid. The barn bigger than the house, with a sloped roof that had seen seasons and held firm. He didn't give me instructions, just handed me a bucket and pointed to the well. I drew water until my arms trembled. I brought it to the kitchen, found beans and pork, started a stew, hung my cloak by the fire,
washed up and rolled my sleeves. I didn't ask if it was okay. It wasn't about permission anymore. It was about what needed doing.
Micah watched me from the corner like a cat. Careful, quiet. I didn't press. Later, I found mending on a chair by the hearth, torn sleeves, frayed collars, a satchel with a busted strap. I started sewing. By the time Silas came back from chopping wood, the stew was ready, and the house smelled like something real again. He stood in the doorway and watched me. I didn't do it for gratitude, I said.
I didn't ask.
I smiled, barely. That was the first time I saw him do the same. We ate together at the table. No ceremony, just bowls and bread and warmth. Micah fell asleep by the fire. Silas leaned back in his chair, watching the flames. I cleared the bowls, cleaned them. He didn't stop me. As I dried my hands, he looked up. "You can stay the night." I figured I was. He almost laughed. Almost. The guest room had a narrow bed, a handmade quilt, and no mirror. I stood at the window for a long time after I'd changed, watching the dark fields, the pale stars. This time, I slept without flinching at every sound. This time, I didn't feel like I had to earn my right to be warm. Spring didn't come easy to Ash Hollow. The snow didn't melt so much as retreat grudgingly inch by inch, leaving behind mud and ice and tired fences leaning from a long winter. But there were signs if you knew where to look. A crocus here, a patch of green on the hillside there, a bird call that wasn't there the week before. At the ranch, we rose before dawn and worked until dark. I didn't ask for wages. Silas didn't offer any. It was never about that. The work itself was enough. It filled me, gave shape to the silence I used to hide inside. Micah started calling me Miss D. No one told him to. It just happened one morning while we were sewing a new patch on his pants, and the name stuck like honey to bread. Silas still didn't talk much, but he listened. Some nights, after the dishes were clean and the fire settled into a soft glow, he'd sit across from me and ask one quiet question, nothing grand. Just, was it a good day, or how'd the sewing go? And every time, I'd feel it that click of recognition, like he saw me, not for what I'd been, not for what I wasn't, but for exactly who I was, right then. It was enough to keep breathing. But the town hadn't forgotten me. Ash Hollow had a long memory for things it didn't understand. I still caught whispers in the mercantile, lingering stares outside the chapel. Folks didn't know where to put me. I wasn't a widow, wasn't a bride, wasn't on anyone's ledger anymore, and that made them nervous. Especially after Barton Lane came back with his new wife. She was small, delicate, blonde. She walked like someone who'd never fallen in the dirt. I watched them once from across the street, her arm tucked tight into his, her eyes flicking toward me, and then away like I was part of the scenery. Barton didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I saw it in the way his spine straightened, the way he tugged her closer. He wanted me to disappear. I didn't. One afternoon, I was loading flour into the wagon outside the mercantile when Pastor Gilroy stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands with a rag. He gave me a nod that was all politeness, no warmth. "A woman's place is best marked by clarity," he said, as if it were advice. I looked up. "Is that your way of telling me I don't belong here?" "It's my way of saying confusion leads to judgment. And this town has eyes." I held his stare. Then maybe it's time the town learned to see better. He didn't respond. I climbed into the wagon, set the sack down, and drove back to the ranch without looking back. That evening, I cooked stew and kneaded bread with hands that didn't shake anymore. Silas walked in after sundown, boots muddy, face shadowed by the brim of his hat. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm tired," I said, wiping flour from my wrists. "Of what?" "Of being seen and not known. Of being talked about like I'm a rumor." not a person. He nodded once, then set his hat on the hook and said, "Come with me."
I hesitated. Where? Town. Now.
Why?
He looked at me, not hard, not demanding, just steady.
Because you deserve better than silence.
The walk into town was quiet. Shadows stretched long across the dirt road. Smoke curled from chimneys. Doors creaked shut as the sun dipped below the hill. It was the kind of dusk that made everything feel soft, even nerves. We reached the church steps just as Pastor Gilroy was locking up. Silas stopped. "I need a word." The pastor blinked. "Of course." Silas's voice didn't rise, but it had weight. "I've heard enough about what folks think Delilah is, about where she sleeps, what she does, what she's owed. But I haven't heard one thing about who she is." "Silas." "You preach about kindness," Silas interrupted, "about humility. But when she stood here months ago, humiliated, abandoned, not one of you offered her a hand." The pastor looked embarrassed. He cleared his throat. "It wasn't my place to interfere." "It is now." Then he turned to me. "Delilah." I froze. He stepped down from the steps and stood in front of me, hands loose at his sides, eyes steady on mine. "You were never a burden here. You're not a problem to fix or a secret to hide. And if it helps this town see you clearer, then I'll say it plainly." He took a breath. "Will you marry me?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was too full of everything: fear, hope, memory, pride. But then I looked at him, really looked, and saw nothing but truth. "Yes," I said. Micah came running a moment later, out of breath, carrying a handful of wildflowers. "Wait," he said. "She needs something to hold." Silas took the flowers and gave them to me, his hand brushing mine. Pastor Gilroy looked stunned, but he opened the chapel doors anyway. A few townsfolk had gathered by then. Tilda leaned against a porch post, arms folded, her face unreadable. The vows were short. No rings, no music, just me, Silas, the preacher, and the wind whispering through the open windows. When the pastor finished, Silas didn't kiss me. He just reached out and took my hand in both of his. It was enough. We walked back to the ranch in silence. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of shame, the silence of peace. Micah fell asleep by the hearth with a quilt tucked around him and a smile on his face. I folded the flowers into an old jar and set them by the window. Silas handed me a cup of tea, warm and strong. That night, I lay in bed with the saddle blanket folded at my feet, the same one he'd wrapped around my wrist that night in the barn. The same one that still smelled like pine. I slept like someone who had finally been seen. The weeks after were simple, full of chores and dust and the kind of laughter that starts small and stays close. I cooked, I cleaned, I planted rows of vegetables in the thawing ground. Silas worked the fields and came home with stories told in half sentences. Micah read better now. He didn't ask for help with every other word. He called the house ours when he spoke to the chickens or the dog. And the town. Well, some folks kept their distance, but others started nodding, started warming. Even Tilda sent over a pie once with no note. Just a smirk and a shrug when I thanked her at the mercantile. People change, slowly, but they do. One evening, I found Silas fixing the barn door. He looked up, wiped sweat from his brow, and said, "It's held together better since you've been here." I smiled. So have I. There are still days I remember that first walk down Main Street. How quiet I was. How tightly I held my satchel. How I thought my worth could be measured by a dress size or a biscuit recipe. But I know better now. I was never a mistake. I was never too much. I was just waiting to land in a place that knew what to do with someone like me,
someone with rough hands and a steady heart.
Ash Hollow didn't change me. I changed it.
One stitch, one meal, one winter at a time. And now, every time I walk through that front door with the sun at my back and the smell of stew in the air, I know this.
I didn't come here to be saved.
I came here to begin again.
And I did.